Welcome to the 3D Modeling 1 Spline Modifiers video lesson. This video lesson has two parts. First, we'll explore a few of the useful spline modifiers. Sweep, which is a form of lofting, allows us to use one spline as a profile shape of an object to extrude down the length of another spline. Lathe, which revolves a shape around the center point to create an object like vases, baseball bats, or glasses in your assignment. The last 3D modifier we'll look at is Extrude, to give the spline's thickness. Another modifier that can be used is Normalize spline. It doesn't create a 3D shape like the first three do, but it can be useful for preparing the shape for further modeling. The second half of this video lesson will walk you through the process of finishing the weather vane model started in video lesson 3. So, let's take a look at the different spline modifiers. I am going to start with the star again. Create a star shape in the front viewport. Now, in the top viewport, create any shaped line you want. I am going to set all the vertices to smooth corner type for this example. We are going to loft these two shapes together using the sweep modifier. I am going to take the star shape as a profile and extrude it down the second line. Select the path that you created. I'll make sure I'm out of vertex mode. In the modifier list, apply a sweep modifier. Already you can see the spline has changed. It is now a 3D object with a surface. Under the section type rollout, select a few different built-in sections. Pretty quick and easy to create some complex objects. Perhaps you could have used some of these techniques for your wall lamp. Now, let's define our own profile shape. Select Use Custom Shape, and then click on Pick to select your star in the viewport. The star is now lofted down the path. You can click on the original star and change it as needed, and the sweep will update. Now let's look at the lathe tool. It works somewhat like sweep, but instead revolves the shape around a center axis. So if you want to create a baseball bat, we can create half a profile using a spline. There we go. That kind of looks like a bat. One thing you want to make sure is that the center points of the bat are on the same plane. So in this example, I made sure they were both at y0. That way they're the same height. This is because of the lathe, and we need to have that center axis line up. Now apply the lathe modifier. Depending on how you created the line, it may look a little messy to start with. Use the direction buttons to affect how the lathe is applied, along with the align buttons, until we get the bat shape we are looking for. Notice how these two options control the final result. If we still need to adjust it, you can use the Axis sub-object mode. Click Axis. Now, using the Move mode, adjust the center line to where we need it. Again, you can go back to the original line and adjust it as you wish. Perhaps I'll modify it slightly into a wine glass. Maybe sideways, but still a wine glass. One thing that you may need to do is select the weld core. For an object like this, such as a baseball bat, a vase, or the wine glass, we want to make sure we select weld core. And what that'll do is weld the center points on the bottom and inside where we had these two original points. If you don't weld the core, that actually leaves a hole through the middle of the stem here, meaning your glass could not hold any water. If you filled it up, it would all drain right out the bottom. So that weld core just makes sure that the inside of the glass and the bottom of the glass are solid across that center line. The only thing to keep in mind is that this is an open shape. The start and end of the shape are located at the center axis of the object. Lathe works great for any object that is radially symmetrical. Next, we'll use the Extrude modifier. It operates much the same way as you would think given our use of the Extrude button in edible polygons. We can create any closed or open shape, though the results are a little bit different if it's an open shape. I am going to create some text. Maybe I'll put my name into it. Some fonts don't work too well for this, so keep that in mind. I'll leave the default font. Let's add an Extrude modifier. Set the extrude amount to something greater than 0. Your name is now in 3D. If you have a closed shape, the extrude modifier makes it a solid object. If you have an open shape, it operates a little bit different. So let's take a look at that. So here I have my open shape, which means it does not close back to itself. Now I'm going to apply that extrude modifier again. I have the same amount, 1 foot, but this time I don't have a solid object. Because we created an open shape, the extrude modifier essentially just gave us walls. It just extruded it down the length of that line. One side effect of this is it's kind of hard to control which direction it extrudes. In this case, it happened to extrude the same way, but depending on how you create the line, this could differ a little bit. It's best to use the extrude modifier on closed shapes. Okay, back into the weather vane file. In video lesson 3, we ended with creating the shapes for the arrow and the rooster itself. Now in this video lesson, we're going to apply some of those modifiers we just looked at to create this into a 3D object. In this case, the object isn't very complicated, so we're just going to use the extrude modifier. But there's just a couple things you want to watch out for. I'm going to start with the arrow, and we'll apply that extrude modifier to it. And I'm going to give it something a little more reasonable, maybe 1/4 inch. That might even be a little bit thick for a weather vane, but if you think of it, it's probably just a piece of sheet metal. So maybe I'll drop this down to 1/8 inch. Might look a little bit better. Just going to slide that off my background image a little bit so you can see it better. There we go. So the arrow doesn't look too bad. Nice rounded corners, at least on the edges where we had the spline. Now let's do the same thing for the rooster. I'll select that spline, apply an extrude modifier. I still have a 1/8 inch. However, all I got was an outline. If you remember when I was saying there's a couple things to watch out for on the extrude modifier, and that's to make sure you have a bunch of one continuous closed shape. In this case, because the extrude modifier just gave me an extruded outline, that's telling me that I have an open shape. Visually, it looks closed. So let's jump into the vertex mode of the spline. I'm going to jump back to the front view. And we'll just double check and look for any holes. I don't see anything. So let's turn on our show vertex numbers. And what we're looking for are overlapping numbers. So I can clearly read most of these. Let's see, here's start, end, started at, so here's 49, 50, 51, and then I got 2 and 3. So I'm missing 1 here. And it's actually right underneath the 5. So by looking for those overlapping numbers, I can tell where the breaks are. Even though this looks like 1 point, I have 2 vertices here. So I'm just going to use my weld tool. Click on that. Now I got vertex 1, and my line ends with 50 there. But they're not overlapping. So now if I jump back to extrude, now I have that closed shape. And it's extruding properly. I'm going to make a copy of this quick. The splines that we've been creating for this rooster or the baseball bat that we did in the previous video lesson or some of the other objects, all of those splines have one thing in common, and that is that they are created on a flat plane. I created the rooster and the arrow in the front viewport. So if I look at them from an angle, they are all generated on a flat plane. I only used the X and Y, in this viewport X and Z, to define that. Only 2 axes. One thing you want to be careful with is having a 3-dimensional line. So if I were to have some of these lines stretched, on a 3rd axis, so look at from the front view, it looks fine, just like our rooster. But on the left view, I got a bunch of lines stretched. So I'm using all 3 axes. If I jump to extrude, this is going to create kind of a weird looking shape. In most cases it will attempt to still create a 3D shape, but you can get some really weird stretching and bend marks and artifacts on your object. So when using splines in this way, you want to make sure that you only model them in 2 directions and then rely on the modifiers to add that 3rd direction. If we want, I'm going to create another clone quick. Copy. If we want, we can right click, convert to edit poly. Now we're in the polygon mode. Now we can do whatever we want with this object given our normal 3D modifiers. So maybe I'll apply a bend. We can bend the rooster. Or any of the other modifiers that work well on 3D objects. Now I don't have to convert it to an editable poly first. That's just what it kind of does behind the scenes. As soon as we put that extrude modifier on there, it's considered an editable poly because it's now a 3D object. So I can leave that spline, and I'm going to throw the bend on again. What was it, X? I can bend this object just like I did this one here. Well, I get rid of it. Other than the thickness, you can see they operate the same. So as soon as we throw some of those modifiers like sweep and lathe onto a line, it's a 3D object. So very powerful. We can go back down to the line itself, modify it, all the other settings will retain, and we can quickly update or change that shape as needed.